The 300-pound inmate stood directly in Mike Tyson's path, arms crossed, blocking the corridor like a human wall. His eyes were cold, calculating, and everyone in that hallway stopped moving to watch what would happen next. "You think you're special," the big man said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. What Mike Tyson did in the next 2 minutes would become prison legend, whispered about for decades, a story that guards and inmates would tell over and over. But before we get to that moment, if you're enjoying these untold Mike Tyson stories, we post new videos every single day, so hit that subscribe button and don't miss out. Now, to understand how Mike Tyson's first day in prison turned into a moment that would define his entire time behind bars, we need to go back to the very beginning. It was March 1992, early afternoon. Mike Tyson, 25 years old, former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, was being processed into the Indiana Youth Center. The intake had been humiliating by design. Strip search, medical examination, psychological evaluation, fingerprints, mugshots, all of it meant to break down whatever identity you had on the outside and rebuild you as just another number in the system. Mike had been through degrading experiences before, growing up in Brownsville, in the group homes, in juvenile detention. But this was different. This was 6 years of his life, 6 years at what should have been his absolute peak as a fighter, and instead of preparing for his next championship defense, he was putting on an orange jumpsuit and being assigned to a cell. The guards processed him efficiently but warily. Everyone knew who Mike Tyson was, and everyone had opinions about whether he belonged there. Some guards were professional, just doing their job. Others made comments, small jabs, testing to see if the famous boxer would react. Mike stayed quiet, kept his head down, answered questions when asked, followed instructions. He'd learned early that the best way to survive a bad situation was to observe first, understand the environment, figure out the rules before making any moves. After processing, a guard named Officer Patterson escorted Mike toward his assigned cell block. As they walked through the corridors, other inmates pressed against their cell bars to get a look, some shouting, some just staring. "Yo, that's Mike Tyson. Iron Mike in the house. You ain't so tough now, champ." Officer Patterson, a man in his 50s who'd worked at the prison for 20 years, spoke quietly as they walked. "Listen, Tyson, I'm going to give you some advice. This place isn't like the outside. Your reputation means something, but it also makes you a target. There's guys in here who'll want to test you, make a name for themselves by taking down the champ. Keep your head down, don't engage, and you'll make it through." Mike nodded but didn't respond. He appreciated the advice, but he also knew that no matter what he did, trouble would find him. It always did. They reached cell block D, and Patterson unlocked the heavy metal door. "This is general population. You'll have a cellmate, rec time in the yard, meals in the cafeteria. Follow the rules, respect the guards, and we won't have problems." Mike stepped into the cell block, and immediately the atmosphere changed. This wasn't the controlled environment of intake. This was real prison, with real prisoners, and the energy was thick with tension and curiosity. As Patterson led Mike down the corridor toward his assigned cell, inmates called out, some friendly, some hostile, all of them interested in the new arrival. That's when Mike saw him. At the end of the corridor, standing in front of the cell that was apparently Mike's destination, was the biggest man Mike had seen in a long time. Not tall like some of the basketball players he'd met, but massive. Wide shoulders, thick arms, a gut that spoke of power rather than softness, and a face that had clearly been through violence many times before. The man was at least 300 pounds, maybe more, and he was standing directly in the middle of the corridor, arms crossed, clearly intentional in his positioning. Officer Patterson's jaw tightened. "Ron, move. I'm bringing in the new inmate." Ron didn't move. He just stared at Mike, his expression unreadable. "Ron, I said move," Patterson repeated, his hand going to his radio. I heard you, Ron said, his voice surprisingly soft for someone his size. Just wanted to get a look at the famous Mike Tyson, see if he's as tough as they say. Other inmates had noticed the confrontation and were pressed against their cell bars, watching, waiting to see how this would play out. Patterson stepped forward. This is your last warning. Move or you're going to the hole. Ron finally stepped aside, but his eyes never left Mike. Welcome to prison, champ. Hope you survive. Patterson got Mike to his cell quickly, but the message was clear. Ron, whoever he was, had just established that Mike's arrival hadn't gone unnoticed and that prison hierarchy would be tested. Mike's cellmate was a quiet guy named Carlos, doing time for drug charges, and he gave Mike the quick rundown as soon as Patterson left. That was Big Ron. He's been here for 8 years, got another 12 to go. Killed a guy in a bar fight, claimed self-defense, but the jury didn't buy it. He runs a lot of things in this block. Protection rackets, gambling, contraband. Guards know about it but can't prove it, and honestly, they'd rather deal with Ron than the chaos that would happen without him. He always blocked people's paths like that, Mike asked. Carlos shook his head. Nah, man, that was specifically for you. He's testing you, letting you know that your fame doesn't mean anything in here. He does this with anyone new who has a reputation. Breaks them down, establishes dominance, then decides if they're useful or need to be handled. Mike absorbed this information, understanding the game but not yet sure how he wanted to play it. The first few hours passed without incident. Mike got the tour, learned the schedule, figured out the basics of prison routine. Lunch was in the cafeteria, and that's where things would come to a head. The cafeteria was loud, chaotic, hundreds of inmates eating, talking, conducting business. Mike got his tray and looked for a place to sit. Carlos had been called away by a guard for something, so Mike was on his own. That's when he saw Big Ron, sitting at a table in the center of the room, surrounded by his crew. And Ron was staring directly at Mike, a slight smile on his face. Mike found an empty spot at a table with a few other inmates who seemed neutral, not affiliated with any particular group. He sat down and started eating, trying to project calm even though he could feel every eye in that cafeteria on him. He was about 3 bites into his meal when he felt the presence behind him. That's my seat. Mike turned around. Big Ron was standing right behind him, arms crossed, his crew fanned out on either side. Mike looked at the seat he was sitting in, then back at Ron. Didn't see your name on it. The cafeteria got quieter, conversation stopped, people sensed drama. Ron's smile widened. Everything in this cafeteria is mine unless I say different. That includes seats, food, and apparently, punk celebrity inmates who think they're still special. Mike stood up slowly, not because he was giving up the seat, but because sitting down while Ron loomed over him put him at a tactical disadvantage. I'm not looking for trouble, Mike said, his voice calm. Just trying to eat my lunch. Too bad, Ron said, stepping closer, because trouble found you. Mike could see the guards now, watching from the perimeter, hands near their batons but not intervening yet. They wanted to see how this played out. And here's where Mike had to make a decision, the same kind of decision he'd made in the yard in the previous story. He could back down, give up the seat, show submission, and maybe buy peace. Or he could stand his ground and accept whatever came next. But there was a third option, one that Cus D'Amato had taught him years ago. Change the game entirely. You're Big Ron, Mike said, not as a question but as a statement. Ron looked surprised. Yeah, so. I've heard about you. Heard you run things in this block. Heard you're smart, strategic, know how to survive in here. Ron's expression shifted slightly, curiosity replacing some of the aggression. What's your point? My point is, you're testing me right now and I get it. New guy, famous guy, you need to establish that I'm not a threat to your operation. But here's the thing, I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to do my time and get out. I'm not here to challenge you, take anything from you, or disrupt what you got going." Mike paused, making sure Ron was really hearing him. "But I'm also not going to be disrespected. So we can do this two ways. We can fight right here, right now, and maybe I win, maybe you win, but either way, we both end up in segregation, and that doesn't help either of us. Or we can just agree that I'm not in your way, you're not in mine, and we both do our time in peace." Before we continue with what happened next, drop your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do in Mike's situation? Now back to the story. The cafeteria was dead silent. Ron stared at Mike for what felt like forever, his crew watching for his reaction, the entire room waiting to see if this would turn into violence or something else. Then Ron did something unexpected. He laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but genuine amusement. "You got balls, Tyson. I'll give you that. Most guys in your position would either swing on me or beg. You're doing neither." "I'm just being real," Mike said. Ron thought for a moment, and then he pulled out the chair across from Mike and sat down. His crew looked confused but followed his lead, sitting at nearby tables. "All right, champ, you can keep your seat, but let me tell you how things work in here." For the next 10 minutes, Ron explained the prison economy, the unwritten rules, who to avoid, who to trust, and where Mike fit into all of it. It wasn't a friendly conversation exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was two men in a bad situation finding a way to coexist. When Ron finally stood up to leave, he looked down at Mike one more time. "You surprised me today. That doesn't happen often. You keep being smart like this, you'll make it through. But if you ever try to undermine what I got going, we're going to have a different conversation." "Understood," Mike said. Ron walked away, and the cafeteria slowly returned to normal, though everyone was talking about what they'd just witnessed. Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, had just negotiated peace with Big Ron on his first day in prison without throwing a single punch. Later that night, back in his cell, Carlos was amazed. "Man, I don't know how you did that. I've seen Ron break guys for less than what you said to him." "I didn't do anything special," Mike said. "I just talked to him like a human being instead of a threat. Sometimes that's all it takes." But the story didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, word spread through the entire prison about Mike's first day. The legend grew with each retelling. Some versions had Mike staring Ron down without saying a word. Others had him issuing subtle threats that scared Ron into backing off. But the people who were actually there, they knew the truth. Mike Tyson had done something more impressive than winning a fight. He'd avoided one through intelligence, respect, and understanding that real strength sometimes means finding a way forward without violence. Big Ron and Mike never became friends, but they developed a mutual respect. Ron made sure that other inmates understood Mike was off limits, not because Mike was protected, but because Mike had proven he was smart enough to navigate prison politics without causing unnecessary problems. And Mike, for his part, learned that the lessons Cus D'Amato had taught him applied everywhere, not just in the boxing ring. Violence is easy, wisdom is hard, and sometimes the greatest victories come from battles you choose not to fight. Mike Tyson's first day in prison, when a 300-pound inmate blocked his path and tested him in front of everyone, became legend not because of what Mike did, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't let ego drive him. He didn't let fear control him. He didn't let the situation force him into a corner where violence was the only option. Instead, he showed that the baddest man on the planet was also wise enough to know when words were more powerful than fists. And that lesson, learned on his very first day behind bars, would guide him through the rest of his sentence and beyond.